Porter. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. We're so grateful that you all are here for this conversation, the Civic Mandate, Securing the Next Era of Leadership. So one of the best things about Chicago, of course, and there are so many, is that it's how our business leaders prioritize civic and philanthropic engagement to a level that is truly unmatched anywhere else. Executives who are new to the area often say that it's the first thing that they learn about doing business in Chicago. We call that here at the Executives Club Chicago-style leadership. And we really know that it's in our DNA how we engage with the civic community. So today we're going to explore how generational shifts and changing attitudes towards civic life are shaping the next phases of Chicago's unique legacy, and what it means about how we'll tackle some of our region's toughest challenges together. So this is a big topic, and we've got a packed agenda, and I see our panel is all ready to go. I have to say, though, looking around this room, while we have a dynamic and amazing panel that we'll get into, I could probably have just set the mic in the middle of the floor and had each of you come up and talk about civic engagement, because this is some of our most engaged civic and business community members, and we're just so proud of that. So with that, I'm going to waddle on up here and take my seat. So first of all, good morning to this amazing panel. We're so appreciative of all of you joining us this morning and your willingness to have this conversation. So I know that this panel needs no introduction, but we're going to go ahead and do that for the one person in the room that may not know who each one of you are individually. Not that I'm calling anyone out, but it's a fact that I know all of you are very engaged in the city. So Richard, we'll start with you. So if you can give a little bit about who you are, because I do think that that's important. It's not just, and that is what I also think differentiates Chicago. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. So if you could tell us a little bit about who you are, and really, how did you first become involved in civic leadership?
Happy to do that. But, since this is a discussion about generational impacts, I needed help turning on the microphone, so thank you very much. Richard Price, Executive Chairman and Interim CEO of Mesro. I've been with the firm 53 years. Born and raised in Chicago. I was born in Rogers Park. I've been here my whole life. So I joined Mesro when I was 25 years old, and I've been there ever since. And I was fortunate enough to be part of an organization whose mission, in part, was cultural and civic engagement in the community. Norman Mesro started the firm in 1937. I was the fourth person to be the head of the firm. I took over in 2011 when our previous CEO passed away unexpectedly from an illness that took him pretty quickly. And Jim Tyree was engaged civically. I think that I learned a lot from Jim. I learned a lot from Norman Mesro and other leaders in the firm. And I think that, just part of our culture has always been to have a civic engagement. It's something that's been very important to us. I think it's a big attraction for people that want to come work at Mesro. So I've spent my life there. I value a lot of the time that I can spend with civic engagement and not-for-profit engagement. I've built lots of relationships in the city because of that. It's a very unique business and civic environment, and I'm honored to be part of it.
Thank you, Richard. Amanda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Edelman. It's really just an honor to be here. As you heard, I'm the resident young person, so feel free to always tap me in for any disputes you have with your children, your young employees, and the list goes on and on. But really, it is such a pleasure to be here. I moved to Chicago a year ago. I'm originally from New York City, although I grew up coming to Chicago intermittently because my family's from here. And most recently, I lived in London. And I run Edelman's Chicago office. When I lived in London, I helped run our regional client portfolio across the EMEA region. And I also started something called the Gen Z Lab, which is a group and offering helping our clients understand and engage with Gen Z, which I think will be an interesting sort of resource and understanding to draw on for our conversation today. And if I can sort of take a step back and get a little personal, I think it is absolutely essential for any leader, for any human, to be civically engaged. And I would say what inspires me is growing up, I played competitive basketball. I played on an AAU team in Harlem in New York City, where I was the only white person. And New York City, like Chicago, the zip code you're born in really determines your outcome and sort of outlook in life. And people who were born just a couple miles north of me had a totally different life trajectory, expected earnings, expected life expectancy. And that is just, a fundamental unfairness. And so that, for me, in a very personal way, is what animates me around civic engagement. And I'm really proud to have gotten involved in a couple of initiatives in Chicago. Some of you might have heard that 1871 and Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and Current are all co-locating within Edelman, particularly as 1871 moved out of the Mart. And so these are just a couple of initiatives that I'm really excited about to help try to improve and sort of increase access to opportunity within Chicago and, ideally, hopefully, within the nation and within the world.
Thank you, Amanda. Maiti.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? I am thrilled to be here. I just want to say that out loud, like I'm bubbling on the inside. Maiti Hamilton, I am the CEO of Leadership Greater Chicago, and even more importantly, let's hear it, LG. And even more importantly, I am an LGC Fellow since 2016. I am a native of the South Side of Chicago, growing up in South Shore. And I'm always so proud to share, and I hope I can do it today without shedding a tear, but the foundation of my passion for civic leadership. And it is grounded in my upbringing. So my grandfather, a very proud, fierce, courageous advocate for working class families. He was the vice president of SEIU Local 73. And so I grew up as a little girl watching my grandfather lead, advocate, and uplift working class families throughout the city of Chicago. I saw my grandfather as an astute businessman. But what I learned, he was in the business of lifting others. He was in the business of service. And he taught me that not only is service a privilege, but it is my responsibility. I will also share that my grandmother, who had a huge impact on my life for many years, she was a crossing guard. And I saw my grandmother as a little girl as the protector of communities. She knew the name of every child and every family that she protected. And so I'm not going to go into my civic service trajectory, but I will say that I marvel that a lot of it mirrors my grandfather. I served at Chicago Public Schools for 18 years. I served as the president of the Chicago Park District Board for 4 years, and I have served in the nonprofit space for over 14 years. So I am so, so proud to serve our city at Leadership Greater Chicago in this way, because I don't think there's anything more important than the power of our community to continue to drive progress for the future trajectory of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Maiti. And Tim.
Thanks so much. I'm really honored and excited to be here with all of you. My name's Tim Welsh. I am brand new to Chicago, haven't even been here a year. I have the privilege of serving as the president of CCC Intelligent Solutions, which is based in Fulton Market. If you have ever had a car accident, almost certainly your insurance company or your body shop used our software to fix your car. So that's what we do. I'm coming from Minneapolis, where I have spent the last 30 years, and much of that time very civically engaged. I have had the privilege of serving on about 15 nonprofit boards. I've chaired 7 of them, helped start something called the Itasca Project in Minneapolis, a number of other things. And the question I often get is, why do you do all this stuff? Right? Why are you so civically engaged? And I so admire the passion that Amanda and Richard and Maiti were describing. For me, it all got started in the late 1990s. Spent much of my career at McKinsey, and I was sitting in the McKinsey office in Minneapolis one day, and we got a call from the board chair of Catholic Charities. I know you have a Catholic Charities. It's very active here in Chicago. So he calls and he says, would anybody be interested from McKinsey in doing some pro bono work? And I was not a partner at the time. The partners all talked about it and said, no, you can't. We don't have time to do this. It's a great organization. We're too busy. And I said, well, I'd like to do it. And they said, well, you can't. You're not a partner. Just focus on serving your clients, and maybe eventually you'll do something like this. And I said, guys, that's great advice. But what you don't know is that I was adopted from a Catholic Charities orphanage. I don't think this is a random call. And so I'm going to go do this. And what I discovered was that my skills in strategic planning that I was using for my clients could be applied in the community. And I just didn't know that. And so I got the bug. And that really prompted me to do all of the things that I've been engaged in. The CEO of Catholic Charities at the time married my wife and I, baptized all of our kids. The board chair, I'm still involved with their family foundation, so it was an amazing thing. But it's just one of those things, like Maiti, you were describing, you see something that you hadn't seen before, and then you realize you can make a difference in the community, and you can work alongside a lot of friends. And I've been grateful for the incredibly warm welcome I've received here in Chicago, and looking forward to working alongside many friends here to improve the quality of life for everybody.
Thank you for that, Tim. And what you all don't know about Tim, you can Google it, but Tim's service has been documented across the New York Times and other places. And so we are so fortunate to. So had you been in Chicago when that call came through, they would have let you go, just so you know. They would have let you do it. So Richard, let's start with you. So as we've talked about, Chicago has been long recognized for the tradition of civic engagement. But as you take a step back today, what does it look like today in Chicago? Particularly, we talked a little bit about, and we'll get more into the generational shifts, but what do you see happening in Chicago today, and how business and community leaders are really engaging within these platforms now?
Well, I think that in my generation, and maybe a generation beneath me, many of my friends who I've met in the business community are in this room. I think there's a very strong commitment to the city, very strong commitment to engagement. I don't sense the same level of commitment for the younger people that are in the city, and I think we have a responsibility as leaders of the city and leaders of civic engagement here to make sure that we are engaging younger people to the best that we can, to make sure that they are as committed to all of the things that are going on here as we are. I'm thrilled to be on a panel with 3 younger people that are obviously committed, 2 of which came from other cities, traveled here, and I think fell in love with the civic engagement. Leadership Greater Chicago is an amazing organization and has been a huge, huge help in getting younger people engaged in the city. So I think that I'm not pessimistic about what's happening. I'm just not optimistic enough, and I probably never will be optimistic enough, because then if you are, you take your foot off the gas a little bit. So I think we have to keep doing what we've been doing. I think at our firm, at Mesereau, it's a very important part of who we are. It's the easiest thing you could do, I've always said, is to write a check. The most challenging thing you could do is get human capital engagement, and that's something that we value a lot in our firm. I do in my personal family, and I think we need to be leaders in this way. We need to lead the way, and we need to make sure that the younger people in business and the rising stars and other people that are associates in business follow in the footsteps, as I'm thinking about the footsteps that I've had to follow in, and people that have taught me along the way. I think we need to teach them as well.
Thank you, Richard. So Maiti, I'll jump to you. So we talk about just the intentional investment in leadership development that is really so critical to sustaining civic engagement. So how can organizations like yourself more actively build leadership pipelines and ensure meaningful investments in these emerging leaders?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Dory. So I think building on what you just shared, Richard, Leadership Greater Chicago was established over 42 years ago. Today, we have over 1,600 fellows across the network, which is pretty amazing. And it was established by the Chicago Community Trust for the purpose of creating a network of leaders who would and could do much more collectively than they would ever be able to do individually or as one organization. And I think that statement is so incredibly important in this moment. So what can we do collectively to continue to build that pipeline? I just want to shout out now. This is not an inclusive list, so I don't want to get in trouble. But I do want to shout out a couple of organizations who have been sponsoring fellows, sending them to Leadership Greater Chicago for years. So with Leadership Greater Chicago, we have two fellowship models. One is the Signature Fellowship. So I mentioned that I am a proud LGC fellow since 2016. The Signature Fellowship targets mid-career senior level leaders, ages 30 to 45. And so we work with organizations like Sidley, like Northern Trust, who has been sending us applicants since 1986, like BCG, like Federal Home Loan Bank, like BMO. Okay, I'm gonna get in trouble. Like Aon, like Nightcore. All right. And so this is so very important, this partnership, but something that Richard just pointed to, intentionality in investing in human capital. So what these organizations are doing, they are contributing to building the future pipeline of transformational civic leaders throughout their organizations. And I think that that is the real opportunity that we have in this moment, is to be intentional and to make that investment in human capital. I do just want to just do a quick commercial about the Burnham Fellowship, because my friend Tim here is a great candidate for that. I'm a good salesperson. So the Burnham Fellowship, created in 2019, and I think it was a brilliant concept, targets C-suite level leaders who are new to the Greater Chicago region and or Chicagoans who are new to a C-suite level role. This serves as this fellowship model is an accelerator. So you have 6 sessions over a 5-month period, but this provides opportunity to instantly create a powerful network, not just within your cohort, but across the network of over 1,600 fellows within Leadership Greater Chicago. That is so important when you are entering into a new city, but it is equally important to have the proximity and the knowledge and understanding of the history of Chicago, of our deep commitment to civic responsibility, and an opportunity to explore the communities that really need that level of investment. So Dory, I think that, to sum this up, the opportunity that we have is to continue to work together, to double down on our investment in the next generation, and to take advantage of opportunities and programs like Leadership Greater Chicago.
Thank you, Maiti. So Tim, so you've jumped right in. I've always admired that about you. You've been here less than a year, and you are really deeply trying to engage in the community and understand what that means. So bringing an outside perspective from Chicago, how have you approached civic engagement, and what stood out to you about being involved in Chicago's civic community?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dory, because you in particular have been incredibly warm and welcoming to me in Chicago. I think Dory was one of the first people that I met in this, and so that got me off on a great foot, and I will always be grateful for that. And then Maiti and I have already, connected. So what I've been struck by in this is how warm and welcoming the Chicago community is. That is, I mean, you can't miss that. Amanda and I had a chance to connect immediately as well, and she, was already doing 1871, where that was extraordinary. So for someone who is brand new, you show up and you realize, oh my gosh, this is a whole group of people who are doing amazing things already, and they're incredibly warm and welcoming. And just know that that's how this community comes across, and so many here are representatives of that. So that's great. And I couldn't have felt more glad to be here, really enthusiastic about it. I will tell you, it's a little confusing sometimes, because people are incredibly warm and welcoming, and everybody invites you to lunch or breakfast or does a Zoom with you, and then there's a description of the 17 different ways that you can be involved, right? Join this committee and that committee and this, and it's all terrific. But as a brand new person, you say, okay, well, where can I make a difference? How can I contribute best? And I think, and so I'm trying to jump in lots of different places and figure that out. One of the things I have wondered about is how do those of us in Chicago, but frankly we had the same issue in Minneapolis, how do we create a welcome system for people, be they already here but stepping into civic roles or coming from somewhere else? What is that onboarding path for people, and how do we make that as smooth as possible? And the other piece is, at least what we saw in Minnesota, and I don't know if it's true in Chicago, but in any 5-year period, about 50% of the corporate, government, and nonprofit leaders change, right? So you have, if that's even remotely true in Chicago, you have this enormous churn that's happening, which means it's even more important to do what Maiti was just describing, which is how do you make sure that pipeline is robust, and critically, how do you help those new people get networked in, because there's going to be this constant churn. And so one of the things I'm excited to do is help the community think about what is that onboarding process, and how do we help people plug in as quickly as possible without, and guide people in some manner to where their skills are needed, as opposed to making it a little confusing and having to figure it out themselves. So that's an opportunity I see, and I'm really eager to help in some capacity.
Thank you for that, Tim. So, Amanda, building off of what Tim said, we know that there are both absolutely strengths of civic engagement and definitely some areas of improvement. From your perspective, and representing lots of different categories, what challenges do you see remain, and how can we create meaningful solutions and productive conversations within sort of this current environment as well?
It's a great question. And let me actually start with the positives, because I think it's important to frame the conversation of some of the things we're doing well versus just talk about the things that could be improved. And I very much want to echo what everyone here has shared. The civic community in Chicago is unparalleled to anywhere I've ever lived, and that includes the West Coast, that includes New York City, that includes London, that includes Boston, and I'm sure many of you who are from different places can also echo that. The nature and the expectation of people to lean in, the coordination, the welcoming, as you mentioned, again, is unparalleled here and is such a strength. So I want us to keep that in mind as I share some things that can be improved upon, right, is that we have a very strong foundation. I think that the generational obligation is fracturing. And that's something that you started with, Richard, and I think is something that we all intuitively feel. And I think there are a few reasons for this. Some macro that are outside the city's control, some micro that are actually within the city's control and within this community's control. From a macro perspective, so Edelman has studied trust for the past 26 years. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Trust Barometer. We did an event a month ago. The reason I bring this up is because it is very helpful to understand how the world is feeling right now. And the world is feeling highly aggrieved. That is our finding of the past 3 years. We're living in a hyper-polarized world with an acute feeling of grievance, and as a result, a rise of insularity, where people of different perspectives refuse to be with people who have a different perspective than them. And this is particularly acute for young people, millennials and Gen Z. Why is this important? This is important because people don't feel like the system is working for them. People feel like the system is against them. People feel like the world is zero-sum. And so they don't feel an obligation to give back. because they don't feel like they are receiving enough in return, right? That is sort of the macro feeling of the world right now. The micro feeling, which is a little bit different because the leaders that we're talking about generally are the more prosperous ones. And if you're more prosperous, you're more likely to trust. You recognize that you've benefited from the system. We're not talking about the general population again. We're talking about sort of prosperous business leaders because that is who, that's who we're talking about here. But that feeling still goes. And when I speak to peers who are in YPO or who are in other organizations, they have less of an attitude of how Chicago has helped them and has benefited them. This sort of gratitude that I hear echoed among this group, and I'm sure many of you feel, they don't feel it. And actually, and look, I'm going to be really candid here because I think it's important that we, expose the truth, warts and all. They actually feel like being in Chicago has held them back in some ways. And so I know in COVID, for example, a lot of people relocated to Miami, relocated to Texas. This is a pattern and trend among really high-performing young people. And I think the other sort of nuance and division here is that there's still a lot of really great corporate talent. And so the companies that you mentioned, for example, is really, really excellent. But if you look at YPO, for example, these people are leaders of startups, or these people are leaders of smaller companies. They're not part of these big corporate institutions. And that's the group that I think we're missing because, BMO, Sidley, et cetera, have a vested interest in Chicago. But if you're running a billion-dollar construction firm, that's your family business, you might not. And it's a lot easier to relocate to Indiana or Missouri or another state where that you feel has sort of friendlier laws. So I say all that to really be honest about what the challenges are. But the good news is that once we identify the problem, we can identify a solution. And something that I've thought about and I sort of put out here as a potential solution, and feel free to, everyone's going to disagree with this, but that's okay. I think it's important that we have a targeted and intentional strategy around the talent that we want to recruit. I don't think that we can be as productive if we have a one-size-fits-all. And so I think the strategy for sort of engaging corporates and sort of engaging corporates and broadly for engaging the sort of next generation civic community in Chicago is important. But what I think is more important is a really targeted strategy for YPO-like leaders. Here are the 100 most important millennial and Gen Z leaders, even young Gen X. And here are the people who we think are flight risks, who are potentially less invested in Chicago. And we're going to go after those people. It's almost like lead gen, but for, sort of the next generation. I know I've spoken a lot. If there's one thing that you remember from this is that because something has been does not mean it will be. And I think we all need to recognize that and start to be very intentional about passing on those norms, welcoming people in who, might be a little bit resistant to it at first, because that is the way that we will continue the legacy of the incredible civic commitment and community that Chicago has.
Thank you, Amanda. And we appreciate your candor there which is why we had a conversation. I was like, you need to be on this panel. Because I do think that so many of us have been brought up in this legacy of Chicago, and it's been a great thing for us, and we've definitely been beneficiaries of that. So I'll pose this question to the panel, that we have this unique tradition specifically of CEOs stepping into civic leadership. And we know that legacy has really shaped the city. So I would love your perspective on how you've seen it shape the city, but most importantly, what happens and what's at stake if it fades? So Richard, I'll start with you there.
Well, I think if we don't continue the path that we've been on for all the years that I've been in business here, I think it's going to make Chicago a very different community than it is and has been. I think this is a special place in terms of the business community here, the civic community here. And I think we all have an obligation to do everything that we can to continue that. So whatever engagement is appropriate for us, and I think you're pointing out some very interesting facts about this. We have to make a commitment to continue what we're doing. I was made aware of an organizational effort today that I think Phil calls the Civic Hub, which is trying to connect the various different civic organizations and business organizations in the city, whether it's this one, the Economic Club, the Civic Committee, the Commercial Club. There's a lot of different ways to get engaged here, and I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that whether it's our children or people that work with us and for us in the next generation, that they feel as committed as we've been.
Other thoughts on that?
I can go next, and I'll be curious everyone's thoughts on this too. Absolutely. I think what's interesting is that post-pandemic in the United States, globally as well, but in the United States, it's been a tale of two cities coming out of COVID for a lot of cities in the world. Some have taken off, some have had a really tough time. And I think many people in this room share this thought, is Chicago's kind of had a bit of a U-shaped recovery. Obviously, things are a lot better than they have been, but in the pandemic years, a few things were tough. And for me, the risk that I see, as we've seen in other American cities, is if the business community is not leaned in, there can be a vicious cycle of sort of urban dysfunction. And obviously, we want to get off a vicious cycle track and into a virtuous cycle track of business leaders leaning in, having something sort of rewarded in return. And I think the important thing here, too, is to not take for granted that people understand and intuit the benefits of leaning in civically. I think we also need to explain why it's important, not just from a sort of this is important for the city and for the sort of civic community, but also this is really important from a personal perspective, right? How does it benefit me? How does it benefit my business? It's great networking. It's great professional and personal development. Makes you a more well-rounded human. And so I think explaining some of the benefit in this, again, hyper-polarized sort of selfish era that we live in will really be helpful to increase adoption across all generations.
What I would add to that, I'm just, thinking about the comment that you made, Amanda, about what may be in the future won't always look like what it has in the past. And I think that there's a real opportunity right now, with Leadership Greater Chicago, what makes us really unique, I think, in this moment is that we target a diverse group of leaders across all areas of diversity. And so that is across sectors. I think that is very important, and I want to underscore that it takes the collective community to make changes and lead transformation in our city. So that's nonprofit leaders, that's business leaders, that is government leaders, that is leaders in healthcare, in education. So we bring like this universe of individuals together. They also come from very diverse backgrounds and lived experiences, which I think is so very important, and it speaks to creating a space in this very polarized world that we are living in that allows leaders to connect to one another's humanity, because that is what builds trust. And when we trust one another, we don't always have to agree, but we can come together around lines of commonality. And I think in this moment, it is how can we continue to make our city better and stronger for all. And so, I really appreciate Amanda's call out too about the younger generation, the leaders who are leading smaller organizations, because at LGC, we target that group of leaders as well. And I think it's very important for everyone to have a voice, right, and a place at the table. And that's going to be very meaningful for our future as we move our city and our region forward.
Just a couple of thoughts on this. I can't comment too much on the Chicago history, although I know that it's very rich. But Minneapolis also has a very rich tradition of CEOs being deeply engaged. When I started getting involved, I heard the stories of Ken Dayton, the founder of Dayton Hudson Target, who would bring people to the Minneapolis Club when they became a CEO and sit them down and say, here's how you get involved in the community. So we have that very rich tradition. But I want to elaborate on a theme that several of the panelists have talked about, which is it's CEOs and others, right? And the critical, and I really do believe this is extremely important, because the relationships that Maiti just touched on, certainly the corporate level, CEO level is important, but if the network isn't built among the nonprofit and business and government leaders at all levels, and if the expectation isn't set, as Amanda alluded to, that this is how we operate as a city, we get to know each other, we reach across whatever divisions we think they are. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, there's this funny thing that you think if you're in Minneapolis, you never go to St. Paul. And if you're in St. Paul, you think you can't go to Minneapolis. It's the most ridiculous thing. But it takes intentionality. It takes the mindset. We have to all learn that this is expected. Doing what we are all doing today is just how we operate. And each of us has both the opportunity and the obligation to connect with others who might see the world in a different manner. And one of the things I love about, leadership development in Chicago is that it's bridging those kind of gaps. We created similar kinds of things in Minnesota. You just can't emphasize this enough, in my perspective. You get across these challenging times, you get through the dips that Amanda described and others, because people know each other and they trust each other and they are holding hands to work together to strengthen the community. And so I love, Dory, what you're doing here and with Executive Club of just building those bonds across so many different venues, because ultimately it's not going to be just the CEOs that matter. It's going to be each and every one of us holding hands to say we're in this together and we're going to make Chicago stronger.
Thank you, Tim. Richard, I know you have a little more to that.
I just wanted to add one more thing in terms of the environment that we have in our firm, and I'm not saying it's a model, but it's something that's important to us. We have 13 different business lines at Mesro. The leaders of those businesses, age-wise, range from early 40s to mid-50s. And we have told every one of those leaders of those business lines to pick their passion, get engaged. We monitor it. We'll support them financially if they want to go on a board, and there's a financial commitment to be on a board. We will pay for that, and we expect them to do that, and we expect them to bring people that are within those business lines with them in terms of civic engagement and engaging in not-for-profits. So I think we have a responsibility, as I said earlier, as leaders, to make sure that the people that are around us, whether it's family, friends, or others, to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and try to inspire them to get engaged as well.
Absolutely. So we know that business leaders are often asked to step in places where government either can't or doesn't have the resources to do. But the question is, how do you decide when to engage and when to step back? Tim, I'll start with you because I know you all have done some interesting things in Minneapolis throughout the years.
It's a quite complicated question, right? That people, and particularly as Maiti described and Amanda described, kind of a polarized world, it can be very difficult to figure out where to go. I so admire, Richard, what you just described of encouraging that mindset. That's exactly the right thing to do. But I guess what I have found is that the ideal constellation is when someone's personal passions, just things that they care about themselves, overlaps with the community's need. That's really an ideal example. An example of this for me is my own personal involvement with a few other leaders in early childhood development. It turns out that I spent 45 days in an orphanage. If I had spent 90 days in an orphanage, I would not be having this conversation with all of you, because when you look at brain development, that's what you see. And so that was an area where me and a couple of other community leaders said, this is a huge deal. We need to figure out how we become more effective as a region at making sure that kids between 0 and 3 have the right nurturing around them. And we called it the first 1,000 days and became a big initiative, that sort of thing. That's an example of where the personal passions and the community needs overlap. And I think that the more we look for those, they're actually all over the place. You just think about the things that any of us is passionate about. I had a chance to meet Blue earlier today, who's passionate about basketball, and he created something that the community needed. I find when you do those things, that's really the magic, because people can't accuse you of being political or choosing a particular side. You're just doing something that you love, and you're doing something that the community needs. And so I think mechanisms like the Executive Club and the Commercial Club and others that can help connect personal passion to community need is where the real magic can happen.
That's such a great example, Tim, and congratulations. I know there was a lot of great work done at that time as well. Amanda?
Yeah, I would love to come in here, and I think, first off, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I'm learning a lot about you, Tim, and I really am touched by your story. It's very meaningful. But I think the nuance that I want to build here is sort of individual effort versus institutional. And from an individual perspective, right, we're all free people, we can support and do whatever we want. That said, I think that a lot of people have capital constraints that mean that they cannot support nonprofits or causes as much as they would like to. And so that's where the sort of business direction becomes very, very important, particularly for the sort of millennial, young Gen X, millennial, and certainly Gen Z audiences, who again, don't have the financial means to sort of have individual decision-making on where and how they lean in. They can support with their time, but not necessarily money. And this is a requirement for a lot of groups and for a lot of boards. And so that's where, again, the business becomes really important. You need that business support, as you shared, Richard. Your business sponsors people's board memberships, which is incredible. And this is something that Edelman thinks quite a lot about, right? Because we advise organizations on when and how to show up for certain causes. And something that we hear from a lot of companies is that they don't want to get into politics. They don't want to get into the political fray. And what's challenging about that is that everything is now political, right? It's not just, okay, I don't want to support the RNC or the DNC. It's all, economic opportunity, climate, all of these things have somehow become politicized. And so the advice that we give clients, again, which are large businesses, and this is the same for nonprofits, for any sector, is what are the core issues that are authentic to you? So say, for example, you are a food and beverage company, and your whole thing is sustainable supply chain. Great. Sustainability, transparency in supply chains. Those are your core issues that make sense for you to get involved with. Something that might be a personal passion is great for you to pursue individually, but may not be a core business concern and potentially put your business at risk for backlash. So that's really how we've tried to talk to our clients about it, is if you're making a commitment, make sure that it is aligned with your business model. And then the other thing is, I actually think a lot of core issues, there's more alignment than we think there is. Just how we talk about it has become really, really polarized. And so there are certain buzzwords that we, both the right and the left use to describe certain things that have become anathema to the other side. But if you talk about equal opportunity, that's not polarizing. Everyone can get behind that. Creating, a better future for the next generation, that's not polarizing at all. So I think also being cognizant of where are there sort of areas of overlap that don't really feed into these culture war issues can be really helpful to understand where, as an institution, you can lean in and lend your support.
So, Amanda, I'll stick with you for a little bit because you said something that I think we need to unpack a little more, because we do see that when folks take a civic stand, that it can be riskier now more than ever. So how do you, you definitely spoke about aligning with your organization, but how do you then begin to weigh the reputational risk for the business against the potential impact that you want to see? How do you begin that process? And would love others to speak on that as well, but I'll start with you, Amanda.
Yeah. So the answer, of course, is it depends, which is always the answer. I'm in PR after all, okay? But there's a couple of sort of stories that I want to share that I think are really interesting here. So we launched our trust barometer, as we always do, at the World Economic Forum at the end of January, and we go, I jokingly call it our World Trust Tour. And so we go and have these dinners in every single city in the United States, several in Europe, a couple in Asia, and we bring together primarily business leaders, but some government leaders, nonprofit leaders, but basically the leaders of the cities in which we operate. The difference in conversation between Chicago, San Francisco, and Houston, just to name 3 cities, was absolutely remarkable. Here in Chicago, we talked a lot about Minneapolis. This is also because our dinner happened in early February this year. We talked a lot about Minneapolis. We talked a lot about sort of businesses' obligation to speak out, whether that's the right or wrong thing. That did not come up once in Houston. What people talked about in Houston instead was the ouster of Maduro, just because it's a lot of oil there. And then also the tenor of the conversation was, I can't speak out against this because if I did, then I would have to speak out against anything. I would have to speak out against everything. So I just mentioned that to say, I think that we are also quite siloed by geography in terms of what our sort of civic obligations are. And many people here represent, yes, Chicago institutions, but national institutions or even global institutions. And so I think it's important to sort of frame the full spectrum of conversation. I thought that was an interesting anecdote. The second thing that I think is an important takeaway here, it's hard. We live in sort of polarized times, and we live in times when stepping out and sort of putting your head above the parapet can invite not just local, but national backlash, federal backlash even. And so a couple of strategies that we've worked with our clients on is one, a coalition approach. You'll notice that's what happened in Minneapolis is there wasn't a single business that spoke out. There was a coalition of Minnesota and Minneapolis businesses that spoke out. So that's a very effective strategy. And then number two, don't flip-flop. Honestly, you have a couple of core issues, things that are directly relevant to your stakeholders, whether that's your customers or your employees. You have a couple of causes that you are known for. Say you're Patagonia and you really, really care about sustainability. If you waver, you will get backlash. And I think Target is a great example. I'm hopeful that there are no Target people in the audience here. But frankly, they're a great example of what not to do, which is that they put themselves out there in pride and then they rescinded that. And so now everyone on both sides is mad at them. So those two things, build a coalition so you're not the only one, and two, stick to your points, stick to your core beliefs. Are both of those, I think, are sort of the defining factors that we would share with our clients.
Thank you, Amanda, and you're welcome to everyone. You got that free PR
Yeah.
advice here, so you're welcome. But would love to hear too from the other panelists and your experiences where how you all have thought about when to get involved and what felt more risky, and how you weighed the potential impact against that. If there are examples or thoughts about that.
I'll just pick up on Amanda. You raised Minneapolis. I commute to Chicago. We have a 17-year-old son, so he couldn't move him. I was one of the 60 people who signed the letter, the 60 business leaders that signed the letter to say that we had to de-escalate the situation in Minneapolis. A number of us had been working for weeks before that to know what to do and to weigh in. And when we signed it, it was greeted with some euphoria and a lot of disdain. And I think this highlights the point that you make, which is a number of us had been working behind the scenes, weren't sure if we could step out, et cetera, and said, and it was only at the second person that was killed that it became apparent that we had to do something. And when we did, it was, as you said, it was many people said, thank goodness 60 business leaders stepped out, did something right, et cetera, and many people said, too weak, too late. And I think that it highlights exactly what you're describing, Amanda, which is that you don't know, and so you just have to make the best judgment that you can. It helped enormously that 60 of us signed it, not 6, right? So that you get a lot of help in numbers. But the real heroes in Minnesota were all the people who did, protested and gave food and all of that. It wasn't the 60 of us who signed the letter. And so just recognizing that you have to do what you believe is right, knowing that there will be people who think that it's wrong. And I don't know a better solution than that, but at least I felt really good that I felt like I did what I could to move things forward, and a lot of other people did things to move things forward, and collectively it worked. And so I personally have just gotten past somebody's going to be mad at me, because guess what? Somebody's going to be mad at me, right? And I just have to do what I believe is the right thing to do at the right time. And there will be people who are critical, but at least I will have a clear conscience that I did it for reasons that I thought were the right thing to do. And I can defend that even if others have different points of view.
Thank you, Tim, and that's the ultimate, that you know someone's going to be mad at you, right? So do what's best for you. Go ahead.
I can, in terms of how I run my business at Mesro, I've always felt that if everybody likes me, I'm not doing my job. And I think the same thing, to echo what Tim is saying, the same thing has to be true with your engagement civically in the not-for-profit world. You have to do what you believe is right. I have no idea what the political leanings are of anybody that I interact with in the city. I don't ask. I don't care. I think that we're like-minded in terms of how we feel about our community, and that's what's the most important thing. So, we have a very motivated and engaged inclusion council at our firm. It's something that's not in favor today, quite frankly, from the federal government. But that doesn't matter to us because we know it's the right thing to do. And if there's some fallout from that, so be it. We have to do what we think is right all the time.
Richard, let's stick with you and what you've talked about, what Mesro does. How do you all lean into civic engagement as part of your talent strategy?
Well, I think that, our culture is one that attracts people that are that want to be engaged in the community. That's part of what we really talk about when we're searching for talent in the firm. And I think that a lot of our talent has come to our firm because of our culture and because of our willingness to have civic engagement and be supportive, not just of the organizations we want to support, but supportive of the time that we're going to give them to spend supporting organizations that are important to them. So I think it's a big part of who we are. But I think that's a big part of who Chicago is. I've, as I mentioned earlier, I've talked to other leaders in other cities. You've brought it out as well. I don't think there's anything that's quite like the business community here. And I think that civic engagement just has to be part of our life. I personally belong to a lot of organizations in the city. Other people in the firm belong to a lot of organizations. We motivate them to be engaged. And I think that that engagement and raising your voice kind of like comes and goes in terms of the level of engagement and how loud your voice is, depending upon what's going on in the city. If you've got a mayor, as an example, who is committed to the business community and understands the value of the business community in terms of the livelihood and the success of the city, we might be able to do a little bit less. But when we have a mayor that isn't as motivated in that ways, then we have to raise our voice a little bit more. And I think every organization, whether it's the Executives Club, Chicagoland Chamber, which represents a lot of small businesses, they're raising their voice in ways today that they haven't done before. And I think that everybody's motivated to come to the same conclusion, which is to have a successful environment here that people can thrive in.
Maedi, I would love for you to speak about how you see LGC as part of organization's talent strategy as well.
Absolutely. And I shared a little bit about this previously, but I think the commitment to investing in that next generation of civic leaders, and I keep mentioning this term, and you've heard it across all panelists, intentionality, right? If we are not intentional, nothing happens. And so I think that we have to be intentional about making that investment in human capital. We have to be intentional within our organizations about identifying these opportunities for our workforce. And I will tell you that when Leadership Greater Chicago was started, I would say, and this has been pretty consistent, but at least 50% of the class for our fellowship is represented by the corporate community. One reason why this is important, because I believe in the power of tangible, proximate experience. And when we talk about Leadership Greater Chicago, it really is not a program. It's not. It is a fellowship, but it is a life-changing journey that by way of this proximity, hearts and minds are shifted. Our leaders leave becoming more inclusive leaders, because they are sitting together and building deep friendships and connections with individuals who don't look like them, who didn't grow up in the same way that they grew up. And then we're leveraging the city of Chicago as our classroom, so that you're going into communities that, if I can be frank, that some of us may be afraid to go into otherwise. And we have an opportunity to identify the assets in these communities, as well as the opportunities for investment. So Dory, I think that, and I know that I'm like a Leadership Greater Chicago commercial, but I really do strongly believe that organizations like LGC hold a very sacred space in this moment. And I believe in something that I call the multiplier effect. So when we're able to have 45 signature fellows and then 25 Burnham fellows have this experience and this encounter, they then take it within the world and they make the world a better place. So that is our commitment, and I think that that is our responsibility as Chicagoans.
Wonderful. So last question, speed round. So one thing, the most important thing that someone could do to become a more engaged civic leader. I'll start with you, Tim, and I'll piano play it down this way to Richard, and I'll wrap it up. Tim?
Lead with heart. Just show up and have a big heart, and you'll make a lot of friends and do a lot of good.
I would say lead with authenticity and purpose. And if I can just make a shameless plug really quickly, Dory, but we have a lot of LGC fellows in this space. So I want to acknowledge our board chair from ComEd, Melissa Washington. And if just for one quick second, if all LGC fellows can just stand. So what I will end on in terms of what we can do, stand in community, work collectively, and make a difference together.
Wonderful. Amanda?
Just raise your hand, honestly, and I think this is particularly true for sort of younger generations. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to know what your area of expertise or your passion is. Just raise your hand, talk to people, and people will plug you in as they're able to do. So just raise your hand and get involved.
And Richard, take us home.
Lead by example. Show everybody what they need to do, impress people about how important it is, and you do that by doing it yourself.
Wonderful. So can we have a round of applause for this amazing panel? Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Maidi. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Richard. Chicago and the world is better because of each of you, and I so appreciate you all. So I will close with just a quick, as we like to call them, church announcements at the Executives Club. So our upcoming events include on April 7th, we have the AI Growth Engine, and we'll actually be hosting that at CCC Intelligence. So thank you. And Tim, I have to say, when my husband gets in an accident, because I never do, I really appreciate your software, because I was so amazed. I was like, oh my goodness, I could just take a picture of this big dent that he has in the car. So thank you for that. So that will be on April 7th. So we'll learn more about AI as a growth engine. And then on April 8th, we're excited to talk about GLP-1s and the GLP effect and how GLPs are. The question is, did GLP-1 just rewrite employee benefits? So our partners, United Healthcare and Mercer, will be there for that. And then on the 19th of May, we have Expanding Access to Health and Wealth, Investing in Chicago's Future, and our great friends at PNC will be hosting that. I think Scott Swanton just left, so Scott and PNC is hosting that for us. So we, as always, love to see you at the Executives Club. If you have any great ideas, please send them to myself or our wonderful email at ideas@executivesclub.org. And again, thank you all for being here and all that I know that each of you are doing to make Chicago the greatest city on earth. Thank you.